Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Aftermath series. Let us waste no time at all and dive right into this week's episode of Critical Role. So we begin this episode in the aftermath of the battle on the Ball Eater that left Ford and Orly slain, which then led to a rather anxiety-filled but still heartwarming moment as the members of the party gathered around Ford, Bo and Jester holding his hand, Caleb propping him up in a sitting up position as Caduceus, with one of his diamonds, pressed it into Ford and cast Revivify. Vines began to wrap around his wounds and then fade away into them, healing them slightly, but there was a moment of pause where nothing was happening, and the rest of the party just had to wait and see what happened. But eventually, breath came back into Ford, and he was brought back to the land of the living. Jester quickly gave him a kiss on the forehead and then turned her attention to Orly, who had also been slain, and she also cast Revivify on Orly and brought him back. After a few minutes passed, a flash of light came onto the ship as Vestaragna teleported onto the Ball Eater and immediately paralyzed a few of the party members, unsure if they were assailants. But after explaining the situation to her, Ves relaxed, and a conversation was had. Ves was curious as to what exactly happened and why. The party was pretty vague on it because they don't really want to unveil that Uk'otoa is pursuing Ford, so they just said that perhaps they were near their lair and they attacked. Ves accepted this information and also told the party that if they are looking for work, once all of this negotiation stuff blows over, they should seek her out. She might have a few jobs for them. Now, we can only imagine what those jobs might be, and this situation is probably rather awkward, perhaps, for Veth, since Vestaragna forced Yeza to work on the beacons. But once Ves was satisfied, she teleported away and left the party to their own devices. The party gathered up the bodies of the assailants and noticed that the deep scions morphed and reverted back to a more humanoid form. Specifically a elven woman, a Goliath male, and a human male. The leader of the three being the human, with a tattoo of a familiar yellow eye on his chest. Now, there were a lot of questions being raised by members of the party. Why were they after Ford? Were they going for the orb, or were they going for him? Did they need Ford alive? Is the orb even physically inside Ford? Well, to answer that question, Caduceus cast Locate Object, and he sensed that the orb was in fact inside Ford, but it was hard to explain. He didn't see it physically, it was just there. And so then another question was raised. Are they able to remove it? And so Jester communed with the Traveler, who confirmed that there are ways of removing this orb from him, and that Jester is definitely capable of doing this, likely through a Greater Restoration spell. And so Jester relaying this information, Caduceus decided to be the one to cast Greater Restoration, which seemed to annoy Jester a little bit since she likely wanted to be the one to rid Ford of this curse. But nonetheless, she let Caduceus cast the spell, and extended her hand for Ford to take in case this removal of the orb was painful. And so, Caduceus began casting Greater Restoration on Ford, and then what happened next was rather difficult to watch. As the spell began taking place, Ford began to go through immense, unbearable pain as his body began to convulse and writhe on the ground. The rest of the party members just had to watch as their dear friend, who they've grown to love and seen grow, had to go through this terrible pain, and there was nothing they could do besides just standing there and hoping for the best. Eventually, Ford began to vomit gallons of seawater, and eventually, to everyone's surprise, he eventually threw up the orb. Caleb quickly took the orb and placed it in one of his amber vaults. And although Ford doesn't feel immensely better after going through that experience, he can rest easy now, knowing that that orb is no longer inside of him. He is finally fully separated from Uk'otoa. But all of this is definitely a crazy traumatic experience for Ford and the rest of the party. Ford's likely going to have some difficulty resting in the evening, as he might worry about having nightmares, and then now he might also worry about waking up with another sword in his chest. But the party reassures Ford that they will be here to protect him. They will be here for him. And so the party has decided, until further notice, to sleep together within the dome and take all of the necessary precautions to ensure Ford's safety. A night of rest eventually does take the party, and in the morning, the party decided to interrogate these bodies of the Deep Scions through Speak with Dead. The Elven Woman and the Goliath revealed that they are willing followers of Uk'otoa, but they are rather vague on if they needed Ford or the orb. We can only assume that Uk'otoa would like both of them. Since the Goliath referred to Ford as the betrayer, it's likely that Uk'otoa would like to exact some revenge on him. The leader of this assault revealed that they were going to take Ford to the final seal to unleash Uk'otoa, and he also hinted at the fact that they're rather close to unleashing him. Now, I don't know if that means they have found another orb that they might be able to use, or they were hoping that if this was successful, then they would be able to release Uk'otoa. But other than the fact that Uk'otoa granted them these Deep Scion forms, they didn't really reveal any other super important information. They were pretty vague on what they were revealing. But with all of that chaos said and done, the party once again has a few days of downtime before they reach the negotiations. One of the days, Caleb went and checked in on Yasha. The last time they had a heart-to-heart, Yasha was sort of confiding in Caleb and asking for his advice on how to overcome immense guilt that weighs upon you. I've expressed before that Caleb probably wasn't the best person to go to, since he feels that he himself is irredeemable, so he might not have a solution to the guilt that weighs upon you, other than to move forward and try to make something that will better the world. In this new conversation, however, they both talked about how this newfound family that they have is something that they both cherish deeply, and they don't want to see it destroyed. So it's just really heartwarming to see them both understanding that they are redeemable, and that with the help of this group, they will be able to remove this guilt that weighs on them. One of the nights of rest, Ford had a rather comforting and warm dream about the Wild Mother. Definitely a nice change of pace for him, given the recent nightmare and battle that had happened. So hopefully Ford can now rest easy in the future, knowing that the Wild Mother is protecting him. Another day, Caleb and Bo decided to have a conversation with Vestaragna and hopefully inspect the beacon. Upon arriving, they met with Ludinus and Ves, and allowed Bo and Caleb to inspect the beacon. Eventually they arrived to the chamber where the beacon is being held, and Ludinus produces the beacon and allows Caleb to inspect it. It appears to be one of the ones that were stolen, and not the one that was recovered in Pride's Call. The beacon from Pride's Call is going to be the one that the Assembly holds onto in secret. During this whole conversation, Bo inquires about the potential job opportunities that Ves was talking about. Ludinus sort of gives her a side glance, and during this whole conversation, we can sort of see that Ludinus maybe doesn't fully trust Ves, or maybe he just doesn't really like her all that much. But it's clear that there's some semblance of tension between the two. As the four of them conversed, it's very clear that both parties are still on board with wanting to see this conflict come to an end. And Ves even hopes to perhaps form a scientific allegiance with the dynasty. Eventually, though, this meeting comes to an end, and Caleb and Bo return to the Ball Eater. And after a couple more days of travel, they finally, on the horizon, see the Kryn Dynasty Armada. And as the two forces approach, the main ships on both sides meet and the negotiations begin. Definitely such an intense and anxiety-induced moment as these two nations finally come together. This is something we've been waiting for a very long time. Even before the negotiations were even going to be taking place, the party expressed their desire to want to end the war. And now the nations are finally meeting, and hopefully it all goes well. The party was hoping to at least be on the ship for the negotiations, but they remained on the Ball Eater at a distance. Essek decided to join the party as they all watched and waited, hoping for the best. And after a long day of waiting, the negotiations concluded for that day. Jester messaged the Bright Queen and Ludinus, and both of them said that the negotiations are going well so far, and Ludinus is hopeful. That night, after Essek left, the party had a brief discussion on what to do with Essek after this is all said and done. And this is the first time in a while that we've really seen the party be split on something. It's very clear that Knot and Bo want to see Essek punished, as well as the other people that had a hand in this conflict in the first place. Caleb, at the moment, seems to be the only one that doesn't want to see Essek punished. And after a little bit of a debate back and forth, Caleb decided to spend a little bit of time alone in frustrated solitude. In the morning, day 2 of the negotiations took place, and Essek once again returned to watch with the party. And once again, after several hours of waiting, a flash appeared on the ship where the negotiations were taking place as the beacon was revealed. And after an intense moment, the beacon was transferred back over to the Dynasty and taken down below deck. And after a few more hours, blue flags were raised on both ships, signifying that the negotiations have come to an end and they were successful, and that the war has finally come to an end. And finally, we could breathe a sigh of relief as the Empire kids, Bo and Caleb, hug each other, since ending this war is something that they particularly have wanted for a very long time, and they've finally been able to see it come to an end. But I'm sure we all still felt a little bit uneasy because there's no way it could go that smoothly, right? But it did, as both armadas separated and went their own ways. The party decided to just head straight towards Rumblecusp and parted from the Empire's armada. And even as they left, no funny business happened. It seems as though for the time being, the war is definitely over. There are likely still to be tensions of some sort, but at least the violence has ended. The party now has several days of travel before they reach Rumblecusp, and after a few days of boring travel, nothing crazy happening, Caduceus finds their ship being followed by an island, and after pointing it out, Ford becomes immediately worried about the safety of the party, as he's heard myths and legends of such things. And as this floating island drew closer and closer to the ship, a snout, a head emerged from the water, revealing that this island was actually a dragon turtle. Now, an unhomebrewed dragon turtle is CR-17, definitely a force to be reckoned with, but they're also of neutral alignment and have rather decent intelligence, so maybe it won't attack them and will just be curious as to what they're doing. We have no idea, but if a battle does happen, it's going to be pretty deadly. And if things go wrong, Uk'otoa will be the least of their worries. But with all of that being said, we are going to wrap up. Let me know all of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions during that episode. We reached a pretty pivotal moment in this campaign, the war between the Empire and the Dynasty finally coming to an end. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will see you all next week.